My name is Andrew Taylor and it's a great pleasure to welcome you to the second season of Stick With It. Last season we had the fantastic host, Mark Hoffmeyer. Without his tremendous work and the fantastic interviews and guests he had, we wouldn't be back for a second season. This season, some amazing guests. I'll invite you now to settle in, relax and enjoy Stick With It. Welcome back to Stick With It, everyone. Today is a very, very exciting day and a very special episode. The guests in the past all have been fantastic, all been somebody I've known personally, asked a few favours, drawn them into the studio, which they reluctantly agreed to. This was a little bit like that. In a moment of weakness at a social occasion, I approached this gentleman and said, would you come on the podcast? And he goes, having not known who I was or what the podcast was, he went, sure. Very special day for Stick With It today. We're joined by the Qantas Chairman, Mr. John Mullen. Welcome, John.
Thank you. That's a very kind, over-generous welcome, but I appreciate it.
Incredibly exciting. So my view of a chairman is a group of guys sitting around a table, round table like this, in dinner suits, cigars, whiskey, and names like Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., the boss, of course, the chairman, Frank Sinatra. Is that how a modern board runs on an ASX-listed company?
I can assure you not. It probably was never quite like that, although I do remember, I think back to the 80s and things, people read the board papers in the car on the way into the meeting and then quick meeting, long lunch, brandy, cigar. That was a little bit more, but those days are long, long since gone, I'm afraid. You now get 700-800 pages of board papers, which you need to spend 3 or 4 days reading before you go to the meeting. And it's a different world.
Can we talk a little bit about the process of being on a board or being the chairman of our Qantas board? Because I'm sure most listeners, especially me, would not have a clue what's involved in sitting on a board, running a board, or even the function of the board, I guess. So can we just go back to the very basics? Big companies like Qantas are run by professional managers and a board sits alongside that or has executive oversight on that. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, it is, certainly. It's a requirement for a public company. Many private companies operate the same way, just as a good example of governance, but you don't necessarily have to. And some private companies, the chairman, CEO, and every director rolled up into one is the founder sort of thing. The US, the boards are a little different there. You often have the CEO as also the chairman. I don't think that works as well, although, who am I to criticize the American system? But our system, Anglo-Saxon, sort of inherited from Britain in large part, but is more where the board is fully independent. And the CEO will be a board member usually, and as an executive. Everybody else is non-executive. And you're there to represent the interests of the shareholders, the reputation of the company, good governance, just make sure that everything is running as it should do in a public company with other people's money.
And so that's a lot of questioning of the advice you get from the professional staff. The board papers come up and there's a lot of toing and froing saying, what does this line mean? Or what does that paragraph, what's this all about? Or do most board members have a pretty good understanding of how the business runs?
Well, most boards will have 2 or 3 people from the industry who know the business very, very well, can go sort of toe-to-toe with management on technical issues even. But you don't want everybody to be from that background, otherwise everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet. So you want some directors from other industries that are relevant to your customer base, perhaps, or to your reputation, or to the digital environment, or other fields. And so that's how we are structuring the Qantas board. Right now we've got 2 or 3, clear airline. We've got Doug and Tony from American Airlines and Cathay. Obviously, both know the airline business very well, but then we've got directors from other fields who can add different perspective. And that's what you want. You want different voices around the table that challenge, but ultimately you work as a team and you reach a conclusion.
You think we had Sir Hudson Fysh and Sir Fergus McMaster sit as chairman for nearly 45 years, so almost half of the company. Do you think if they were sitting around the current table, you'd see eye to eye, or would they cut you any slack considering they had so much skin in the game right from the start, do you think?
That's a super question. Look, I would hope they would be pleased, and their legacy is Australia's national flag carrier. And we've had some highs and lows, but by and large, it's a very successful, very well thought of company with a global reputation. I'd hope that they'd be proud of that. Probably they need to get used to the modern sort of independent board structures of big public companies and proxy advisors and shareholder meetings, all those other things they probably didn't have to worry about back in those days. But I hope they would be proud of the legacy.
And do you have a WhatsApp group or a signal like the US congressmen that were sharing war plans over messages and send them to journalists? Is there a Qantas board on a WhatsApp where you send each other, you check on the cricket scores? And
there is, but we don't use it to communicate with journalists or the cricket scores. Vanessa, if there's something happens, she keeps the board updated. You may have read about this in the press. This is actually what happened, or this is something that we should worry about, or something we don't have to worry about. She's very good like that as a communicator, and then we use it to be on top of each other. Obviously, if it's a major issue, it ends up in a proper board paper and a detailed discussion, but it's a good way of staying in touch in real time.
Communication's amazing now, isn't it?
Isn't it ever? Yeah.
Well, when you read some stories about when Qantas was trying to get going, and they sent Fergus went down to Melbourne to lobby the Prime Minister for some funding, and sent a telegram back to Longreach to Hudson saying, you've got to get to Melbourne now, and that was days when they were trying to save the company, where now we make decisions instantaneoany, I guess. So
I know. Oh, it's amazing. I mean, one of my earliest jobs in aviation was back in TNT days in the early 80s. And in those days, everybody wrote checks, you might remember. Well, you probably don't.
Yeah. Absolutely, I do.
But, and we ran a network of about 40, 50 aircraft every night. And we had the keys to every bank branch in regional New South Wales. Courier would go in, pick up the bank the checks of the day, take them out to the airfield. A whole lot would fly into Bankstown. And then we'd take all incoming checks, take them into the bank's clearinghouse in Sydney. They would process them all, and then we'd fly out the processed checks back to the banks the next morning. When you think today, you just flash your iPhone and ding,
away
payment's
it goes
gone
instantaneously.
So there was this huge apparatus and infrastructure around payments that has all disappeared today.
Took time. Well, it's a fantastic segue. So grew up somewhat overseas, Portugal and Spain, if my research is correct.
It is. I had very eccentric parents. I don't have time to go into the full details of it, I think, but I was born in England. But my parents moved overseas when I was very small and went to Portugal. So I spent time there, and then later Spain. And we still actually have a family house in northern Spain, early on in the Pyrenees Mountains to this day, generations later. So I had, my parents didn't have any money, and it was a difficult sort of childhood in that way. But when you're young, you don't care. It was fun. I loved every minute of it. I wonderful memories of my childhood.
So how do you then become from a university in the UK doing a hospitality management type degree to being the chairman of what I will argue is the greatest company in Australia by miles, but I may be a little bit biased. So,
well, so am I. I'll second that.
Can we fill in a few 50 years worth of details in a couple of minutes, I guess?
Well, there's a little bit of logic. So yes, I did actually. I think I was the worst student in the university that year by bar none, but I did get a degree in sort of business management and hotel management. But I went to work for a hotel company, a big hotel company of the day called Grand Metropolitan. And they very quickly, I saw they had a subsidiary that provided logistical services to remote sites. So people were digging or building mines, dams, oil rigs offshore, all that sort of thing. They provided all the catering, the cooks, the cleaners, temporary accommodation, really a logistics exercise. Because I'd looked at the big hotel world and I thought, I don't know, I'll live to be 105 before I even get halfway up the management structure. Industry. So I thought, well, I'll give that a go. So I went off to the Sahara Desert, Algeria, and I spent 3 years there working on the pipeline, building a pipeline from right down south to the coast. And in those days, you could fly from, you worked 8 weeks on, 10 days off, but with no breaks. It was tough in those days.
I'll say.
But you could go to London or Paris and you're 10 days off. And I thought, well, Paris sounds much more exciting than London. So I went to Paris, met my wife there, and then eventually the company moved us to Australia. Well, I joined another company in France. I worked in Marseille in the south of France for a bit. And they sent me all around the world again, but went to Australia, and we became sort of early illegal immigrants almost, because we said, look, we don't want to go. He was born in Japan and grew up all over Asia and lived and worked in France most of our life. So we were a real mix of backgrounds, and we fell in love with Australia at that time. And we said, oh, well, let's just I applied to immigration just to change your visa, and they said, no, you've got to go back to your country of origin, being France. I said to my wife, Jackie, I said, we'll go back. We'll never come back. I said, we'll just stay here and see what happens. So we did that for a bit, and I got increasingly strident letters from immigration.
Suggesting you get going.
And the last one sort of basically intimated that we'd be arrested and deported. So that's it. I think we've lost the fight, darling. And then I got this letter out of the blue saying, you want to come for an interview? And I did, and the rest is history. And I've never known to this day why. I've still got the letter. We didn't know anybody. We had no friends in high places. We had no strings to pull. Must have been our lucky day. Someone in the immigration department picked us out of a big file of papers or something. And then I joined TNT, and the express side of TNT, which was Air Express. We used to fly the little West Wind jets around, and a whole lot of turboprops, etc. And it sort of grew from there. And many years with them in Europe, then DHL, 15 years with DHL, which is a very big operator of aircraft, of
massive.
course.
Yeah.
I also worked for Ansett in the early days when, with my TNT hat on. They managed Ansett at the time, so I looked after the air freight divisions then. So aviation's sort of been, and my dad was a pilot as well, of course. And
was he?
Yeah, he was a pilot. He was flying in a bomber age 17.
Was he? I know.
And I think, I joke about it, but when my son was 17, which if you're not home by 9:30, I don't know where you are. His age, his generation, they were all in combat and lied about his age, and off he went.
Crazy, wasn't it? Well, Hudson and Paul McGuinness, 21, they were home hustling in 1920 looking for finance to start a dream. It's
incredible people, absolutely incredible. I think today what's stress is, it's Sauv Blanc or Chardonnay, isn't it, really? I mean, compared to what they went through.
Well, unless it's a treasury wine, and then it's never a stress because it's obviously excellent. Do you think we are less risk adverse? Because, when I go back and do some research, you've taken taken lots of risks, I'm sure they've been calculated. Do you think, before we get nutting down into the business side of it, as people, do you think we've become less risk averse than our parents or their parents, or how many generations? I think it's changed really quickly, my personal opinion, but what's your thought on that?
Oh, totally we have. And in business, it's particularly notable. Certainly in the public company world, a lot of good things, but some of the bad things is everyone's terrified to make a mistake, because then you get instantly pilloried in the media and shareholders and this and that. So, and that restricts entrepreneurialism. It restricts people taking a chance. I think the US environment is much healthier than ours in that respect. A lot of things not good about the US, but there are some things that are very good. And I think that's one of them. Their failure, obviously, if you fail 10 times doing the same thing, that's different. But if you have a go at something and it doesn't work out and you learn from it and you have a go at something else, that's usually builds character. And I certainly have learned an awful lot more from my disasters and my successes, and they remain etched in your mind. And you don't make the same mistake twice. I think in a public company world, it's a challenge for a board to try to encourage management to take risks. And obviously not that if it goes wrong, you bet the company. You're not going to do that. But take enough risk that every now and again you get a good one, and it's sort of game changing.
So growing up by the sea in Portugal and Spain, you've got this interest in sailors and maritime history. Is that from a small boy reading books about adventurers or explorers, or where does that come from, John?
You did. You've done a lot of research. I
haven't finished yet.
No, it is. So, I've sort of, I guess, again, probably from my father, he was interested in history, not particularly maritime, but in southern Portugal there where I grew up, and this was before tourism, southern Portugal today looks like the Gold Coast, but in my day there was nothing. It was just, in the 60s. It was just golden beaches, and it was fabulous. But Prince Henry the Navigator in the 1400s, he sent wave after wave of ships down the west coast of Africa, trying to see if there was a way around Africa to get to the Far East and break the Venetian and Arab monopoly on spices and silks and all those sort of things. And he built a castle up on the cliffs in Sagres, and I used to ride my bike up there and look out over the ocean and just mesmerised these little tiny ships, the size of a harbour ferry or smaller, sailing off into the great unknown. And they had no maps, they had no GPS, they had no radios, they didn't have lifeboats. Some people thought the sea boiled at the equator, others thought that the world was flat and they'd go over the edge. It's amazing. And I just got mesmerised by that. And my parents bought me adventure books and things about Magellan and Cook and Vasco da Gama and all these guys, and it just sort of grew from there and became, my wife says it's an obsession. I think it's a passion. It's either way, it's something I find very rewarding.
It's part of it. Is your greatest thrill away from the business world finding Flinders boat, the Cato? Was that, or was there something bigger than that? I mean, Flinders is incredibly important to us, obviously. He circumnavigated, he chartered, he then rode for 700 miles back to Sydney after they got shipwrecked. Incredible.
Yeah, incredible people. And they were all kids, you know.
I know.
They were so
I think he died
young.
at 40 or something, you know, very young.
Well, that's true, of course. Yeah, your life expectancy wasn't great, but they would go to sea age 7. And, so by the time you were 20, you already had, more than a decade of
absolutely.
Experience at sea. And you can imagine that today. No, they've all been rewarding. My main interest is that very early colonial sort of period of exploration. But we also found the Montevideo Maru a few years ago. I don't know if you saw that, but that was pretty moving. That was Australia's worst ever loss of life in a single incident. 1942, so not my normal period of interest, but it was so significant. And ironically, no one in Australia had heard of the Montevideo Maru. Even I hadn't. I love all this subject. And yet, over 1,000 young Australians lost their lives in a single incident, the sinking of the ship in the South China Sea. So that was pretty exciting. And to find that, probably the most rewarding by far. Obviously, it's satisfying. Yes, we've nailed what we went to look for, but the closure that it brought for so many families, it's extraordinary. And you'd think, oh, well, it's, 100 years ago, or 80 years ago, whatever it is, surely nobody worries about that anymore, but you'd be amazed. There are dozens and dozens of families who never really knew what happened to Grandpa or to Uncle Jack and loved ones who remembered and their dying days, wished they'd heard what had happened. Being able to close those loops, that was really moving.
What's that moment in that dark, cold water like when you see something like that for the first time? Can you describe that first instant of time? I know it's a millisecond of a time, but it probably feels like an eon when you're actually in it. I'm really interested what that...
Yeah, it is. It's a huge rush of excitement because, you're looking at something that no human has seen for a long time, maybe hundreds of years. And you know that usually tragedy took place there of one form or another. Not always, but a great majority involved loss of life. And to actually start to see those bits of the wreck still there after all these years, incredibly moving. And when we found, to your example, the Cato, when we found that, the contrast that there were the stocks of iron anchors this thick that had been bent like spaghetti through cyclones and things on the reef, power of nature, and yet down at about, not deep, 12 meters or whatever, we found a little shot glass, only that big, that was just
fine
going
glass.
Backwards and
Really?
forwards and now you'd obviously been buried and a storm had surfaced it again or something, but we raised it and it just had a little chip out of it, and we all had a little tiny sip of something out of it that night. I thought, this is pretty special.
Incredible, isn't it?
Flinders and his officers would have shared a drink out of that little shot glass.
It had literally been around the world before people knew what around the world was, more or less, hadn't it?
Yeah,
incredible, isn't it?
Absolutely. I have such admiration for those people. Even aviation. My dad, at the end of the war, when he flew the shuttle from London to Singapore to bring the Changi prisoners back.
Yes.
And, it was something like 9 stops or 12 stops, and they'd land in the sand in the middle of the Iraq desert, and there'd just be a British Army Jeep and some oil drums, and they'd have to hand pump, and I'd say, Dad, how did you navigate? And he said, well, we looked out the window. That was what the navigator's job was. And, it said we had very early radio detection equipment that you could get sort of Radio Cairo and you could get Radio Baghdad or something. The needles would sort of do that, but you sort of fade across, and that must be roughly where we are. That was it. And they went the whole way around the world like that,
Well, even my own career, so I was in the Territory in the early 90s briefly, and I flew an aeroplane from Darwin to Auckland in New Zealand. And GPS was pretty new. I hadn't been any further than Brisbane, so that was my very small frontier of crossing that frontier, that adventuring. It's exhilarating, isn't it? Now I'm a risk manager. That's all I do. I manage risk on behalf of Qantas. So
thank heavens.
and a satisfying job or a satisfying day at work for me is when I get to the other end, it's incredibly boring. That means I've done my job well. So
absolutely.
The flying part of it's a real small very small part of it now. It is that risk. And a lot of that you don't notice you're managing. It just sort of happens. Do you think so? Flinders was well written. He wrote, even though he got locked up in Mauritius and all these adversaries. He wrote, prolific writer. His crew seemed to very respectful. They liked him as a guide. Do you think that sort of management or that leadership is there any place in the modern world of that old maritime leadership where the captain was the captain and people respected him for that position? So there was respect in his position. Obviously, was inherent. But obviously, there was plenty of mutinies where they didn't like the captain. Eventually, they tied him up and threw him overboard. So, does that old style? Is there any place for that old style management in the modern business? Do you think?
It's a good question. Yes, I think good leadership is still fundamental to any organisation, whether it's your local school fete or it's a huge multinational. Humans are still humans, and you want to feel you're coming to work for a company or an organisation that you like, and you respect the people who are running it, and you would go that extra mile because you think that you're doing a good thing, and your leaders are doing a good thing. And certainly, we've become maybe a little bit more sort of quarantined from the day-to-day realities of saving people's lives at sea or whatever, which was obviously was some of the sort of things that made people like Flinders so famous. He put his men first in every time, and he'd have the last drink of the remaining rations of water and things like that. People respect that.
Yep.
And so I think there's still very much a place for it. It's just become a bit more polished and procedural, but we're still humans, and we relate to other human traits. And the whole thing about culture, it's a very hard thing to write down, isn't it? You say, what's the culture of this organisation or that? It's really hard, but you know it almost immediately when you're there, whether it's good or bad. You feel it quite quickly, and so I think that's a huge responsibility of all executives today to try to remember that at all time and remain human, keep your feet on the ground.
Is this business, as in Qantas, a very different business when you walked in the front door than other ones you've been involved in? As in the people, the business, all businesses are different, but I guess specifically talking about the people, did you walk in and see these 20-odd thousand people and go, hang on, there's something different here, or this isn't going to be as simple as I thought it was going to be as an observer compared to being an insider?
I think the first thing I would say is that you've almost got sort of two different aspects to it. I mean, one, you've got to run a business, and the airline business is notoriously difficult,
complicated,
cyclical. And every few years there's a fuel crisis, or there's a pandemic, or some bloody thing happens. So it's a tough industry, but at the same time, for a flag carrier like Qantas, you've got a huge responsibility to protect the reputation almost of the country. Because many people overseas, they may not have visited Australia, but they've heard of Qantas and the flying kangaroo and all of this. It's a big part of Australia's identity. I think we're custodians of that to pass on to the next generation, and it's a huge responsibility for everyone involved to protect that. That's where I think we had some challenges in the last few years. Don't need to go into all of that, but hopefully we're rebuilding from that. And even the fiercest critic when I started, when I got lots of helpful advice, as you can imagine, but even the fiercest critic. They still wanted to see Qantas survive and succeed. There's a degree of national pride and identity in it. So that made it different to most companies.
You follow online and the fiercest critics, but they always come back and still travel with us. It's interesting, isn't it? The most vocal say the worst airline ever, I'm never flying with them again. And then they're back flying with us. So I know myself, I'll get on the jet, not necessarily when I'm working, but have been away on holidays. And there is that real emotional something about getting on a Qantas aeroplane, isn't it? You have a flight attendant come up and say, "G'day, mate," or "How you going?" And it's very difficult to describe, but I think the Australians really understand that. It is a very big, important part of who we are, isn't it? So as a publicly listed company, that must be incredibly difficult to manage the both parts of that equation.
It is, but I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head. And, as an airline from a country like Australia, it's hard to compete with, say, Middle Eastern airlines in terms of gold taps, or their labour costs are a third of ours. So we shouldn't try to sort of out-compete in that way. We should compete using strengths that make Qantas Australian. And I know from, I lived and worked all over the world for many, many years. And when I was coming home, I'd get on that Qantas airplane in London or LA, the music would be playing, and the flight attendant would say, "G'day," and I just felt,
You do immediately.
I'm home, fantastic feeling. And you couldn't get that from any other airline. So that's the secret sauce we need to bottle and protect. And, the cabin crew and the flight crew are the ones who are the front-facing strength of that. We're very lucky to have wonderful people all around the world. Many people have been with the company for a long, long time and are very supportive. And you just get that vibe when you get on the plane.
So Mallory said about Everest, we climb it because it's there. And then Sir Edmund Hillary said, we don't climb to conquer the mountain, we go climb to conquer ourselves. So if we bring that to Qantas, why in your golden years are you back being involved running big companies again, John? Is it this adventurous spirit that you can't get out of your system? Are you addicted to this sort of thing? Or what's this all about?
It's probably a mixture of all of the above. Firstly, I think important as you get older to stay busy. I see.
Yeah, but you could be playing bowls or
but I just
pickleball like everybody else.
The intellectual stimulation of the business side, the human warmth stimulation of the interaction with crews and people, and the satisfaction that comes from seeing us rise up again in terms of reputation, and you want to make people proud that when they go to the dinner with their friends, or who do you work for? I work for Qantas. Oh, great! You don't want people to go, where was that? And that's a huge responsibility and a privilege to be part of it. And I think if I can, in a small way, in a few years' time, when it comes time to retire, if I can look back and say, I think we all did a reasonable job, and Qantas is now really well thought of, and is back where it should be, doing a good job for everybody, employees, shareholders, community. A brand new fleet. It's pretty exciting to be part of that.
I was lucky enough on a layover, went up to Oxford to the Bodleian Library, and there's a Shackleton manuscript sitting there that obviously they have so many things. The archives are incredible, and so does Qantas for that matter. But do you think in 50, 100 years, 200 years, we'll be opening at the New South Wales State Library, or in Canberra opening something written by John Mullen? Are you a great writer, do you think? Or are you a great writer?
No, you definitely won't be doing that. But I'd hope you would be reading books about Qantas, because it's, as I said, it's an integral part of our country, our country's story. And I would hope with another 50 years or 100 years, Qantas will have gone to whole new heights again. And it'll be a wonderful story going all the way back to Longreach, the same way I first came in, just thinking of those guys who sat in that tiny little office in Winton. We're taking the board there, by the way,
which
next
is
year.
Very exciting. If you haven't been to Longreach to the Founders Museum, I've literally just come back and had some fantastic time with the board out there and some of the folks involved. So I highly recommend it. Sorry, John, to interrupt about the board going on Longreach. It's fantastic.
I'd also highly recommend it. It's an extraordinary museum, and it's very easy to think, it can't be anything special because it's miles out in the bush somewhere. You're mistaken. It's a fabulous place, very, very well run. But no, we're taking the whole Qantas board out there. I think it's important that they see this history themselves. And although the boardroom in Winton is about the size of this room, so I'm not sure that we'll get everybody involved. And we're going to have one section of the board meeting in that room.
Fantastic.
Even if we all have to stand to do it. So I think you can see I'm a bit of a history tragic, but I think that's part of the DNA of an organization, isn't it? As we were just saying earlier.
And do you think many companies are trying to protect that DNA? I've been around and seen plenty of change managers come and go with Qantas, and the more things change, the more they come back to our original grassroots of just getting on with it, being safe, being sensible. Do you think that grassroots, that DNA is important to a successful business? Or can you just start something that's purely in a petri dish, with no bacteria, that's just a clean skill slate, you get on and you run a business and the people aren't important?
The last bit, people aren't important. People are the most important thing. Basically, in any form of business, if you've got money in a balance sheet, you can buy things, you can buy equipment, capital assets, all of those things, but you can't manufacture culture and leadership and those things. You can't go to the shelf and buy that.
Is that the same for sorry to interrupt, foreign business as well that you work for? Do they have that same opinion?
I think you would hope so, and
yes.
most people certainly try. I think the airline industry is iconic, and there's something about the flag carrier of the nation that sounds egoistical, but it differentiates us from somebody making ball bearings in Parramatta. I mean, you may be making the best ball bearings in the world, but it's not something that stirs people's emotions quite, perhaps. And I also think aviation in Australia is still a bit of magic about it. Even if you're flying Jetstar or, a cheap holiday fare, but you're going with the kids and everybody's excited to go to the airport and check in, and there's still that sort of magic. Whereas I think, in the US, the industry's so developed, it's just like a bus service, really. And they don't think of it as any different to a bus. So I think that's part of the magic and the culture of an organisation like Qantas.
Well, I'm seeing my 20-year-old who's a Jetstar first officer. The look in her eye, she has that passion now. It's a wonderful thing to go back and watch our kids. So I join with a whole heap of guys and girls, and of course our children are all of working age, and my daughter's a Jetstar FO, and she still has that excitement about the whole thing. It's incredible to watch.
That's fabulous to hear. You must be so proud.
Well, she's far smarter than her father.
I don't doubt that. That's lovely. Yeah.
So my wife worked for Qantas. I've had 30 years. My daughter's starting. It just ekes into your DNA, this place, doesn't it? I mean, I hope you'll get to realise that. It really does, yeah.
I think I do already. I wish I had your longevity of service and other things, but even in the short while I've been here, I absolutely get that. And as an Australian, I feel that we've all got a little tiny bit of Qantas DNA in your system.
Who did you ring up when you were offered the job? Did you have you got a mate or somebody you ring up and say, you're never going to believe this, I've just got a phone call offering me the top job or the Qantas chair? Does it happen like that?
It sort of does, yes. No, it does. I spoke to a number of people. You sort of do a bit of due diligence. Obviously, at the time, the airline was not in a good shape, and a lot of reputations on the line. And but I was okay with that. I wasn't worried by that risk per se. The thing I spent most time on, interestingly, given your background, was safety.
Was it?
Because, look, the numbers are the numbers, and, you have a bad year and you disappoint shareholders. It's not good, but you haven't killed anybody.
Yeah, you have a whole loss in it.
And whereas safety in an airline, I don't think there's anything more paramount. And, any industry, often say any industry, sadly, you can have an industrial accident and somebody can get hurt or killed by a forklift or whatever. But there are not many industries where you can take 300 or 400 lives at a time. So that was, to me, the most important thing. And I tried to understand as much as I could about how real the safety culture was in Qantas. And have we just been lucky over the years, or was it the result of a really sustained, professional, dedicated effort? And once I satisfied myself, that was very much the case. And then for me, that's all I needed to know. And privileged to have a go at it.
So the 2,000 or 3,000 pilots you've hired over the group. So we're all hired to be very similar. So we might look different, some short, tall, fat. We've got some girls, not enough. But as personalities, we're very, very similar. So that makes us good as pilot employees. But I'm not so sure that makes us good as employees, because we're so used to closed questions, black and white. We just don't cope well with corporate speak. So I think this is an interesting point where perhaps our professional managers don't spend a lot of time thinking about dealing with segments of your workforce. We're long-term employees, but we only do well in yes and no's. When I ask a question of the crew, it's a yes or no. It's not the corporate speak does not sit well with me at all. You think Flinders and, we keep harping back to this, but we're a bit like that. We just like yes or no's. But the whole corporate world's evolved and we just haven't. So how do the professional managers deal with a big set like us, I guess?
That's a really good question. I assume that part of the reason for the differential is, if something happens on an aircraft, you want the pilots to know exactly what to do. If that happens, you do this.
Absolutely.
If that happens, you do that.
Yes.
You don't want people sitting around and saying, well, let's have a chat about this, and we'll see what consensus of opinion is. You need to act. Boom, boom, boom. So I think that sort of obviously breeds the professionalism of flight crew. But sadly, the corporate world and elsewhere is not as black and white, and quite often you've got to try and negotiate and land on a grey compromise in between black and white. And I can understand that can be frustrating to people who are used to making quick decisions and being able to implement that straight away. I don't think it's unique to Qantas, but I think pilots generally we don't do a good enough job of supporting those concerns that aircrew have. And I think we're very conscious of it in Qantas now. We think we've got wonderful aircrew, so it's not a complaint. But
No.
but I'm equally conscious that if you do the employee opinion surveys and you look at satisfaction levels, the flight crew tend to be lower than other areas, and that's troubling. So we're really trying to bend over backwards to understand the drivers of that and see what we can do to make it better. And it's not usually. I mean, everybody wants to get paid more money and they want to do all those sort of things, but it's not one specific thing like that. I think it's just a general feeling sometimes that flight crew aren't listened to enough, that quite often the decisions and things that they see as being pretty obvious takes management a long time to notice and get their head around it. You say, well, I've known that for the last 3 years. Why didn't you act sooner? It's those sort of things I think that we have to work on and trying to make it as much as possible a two-way dialogue. So we're listening. The management team are listening and engaged. And I think the current management are really trying hard on that. And not perfect, of course, none of us are, but I think they're making a real effort.
I don't want to give the survey companies any leg ups, but we spend our entire careers always looking for the negative. That's how we manage our risk, the bad outcome. So when we get a survey from work, we're assuming that there's something bad in this. So we tend straight away jump to the negative consequence. You're asking me this not because it's a positive thing, because it's about to go negative. So whilst I don't want to give any secrets away to the survey and the engagement companies, I think that has a lot to do with our psyche. We're just so hardwired to any decision we make, we straight away assess the negative. That's the first, rather than the positive. It's a good decision because I've stopped the negative rather than I've allowed the positive to happen.
Well, it's a very interesting observation. I hadn't thought of it that way, but it actually makes sense. Very logical.
Well, we're just trying to.
We want you to
absolutely
do that. Helps keep us safe.
But that doesn't mean you can now spin the engagement survey to saying because 90% of the pilots are unhappy means they're actually 100% happy type thing. So it's not a free kick up.
I'll be on it as soon as this interview is ended.
So what about the 350 sitting here, John? So when Sir Hudson retired, he said that the jumbo he couldn't see how they were ever going to feed 450 passengers, but he was very excited about supersonic flight from Sydney to London. Was one of the interviews ago quite late in his career. This sunrise is incredibly exciting for us as a company, isn't it? I mean, I don't like the Airbus particularly, but I understand the product.
It's extraordinarily exciting. It's a real world first by anybody's standards. And with that aircraft, there is no airport in the world that's not reachable in one stop, which is an extraordinary.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Claim to fame, isn't it? When you think back to those early founders' days. I think it'll be very well supported. I think it's so groundbreaking, particularly for business people. I'm not sure that sort of mums and dads traveling in sort of 43G with two young kids, or how they would face a 23-hour flight. Although, strange enough, I talked to my kids about it, and they both said, actually, it's more getting off in Dubai in the middle of the night or Singapore with waking the kids up, and so that's actually worse than the flight. So actually, even they, I think, see it as a positive. But certainly for the business traveller, it's absolutely amazing. And if I take my Qantas hat off and just think of it as a business person, I could afford it. I'd sign up for it every day. Because once you're on the airplane today, it's pretty civilized. It really is. It's an enjoyable experience. But getting through security and all of that stuff in airports and the big airports and the hubs where you have to change terminals at 2 a.m. and get on the train and all this, to avoid all of that and go single flight. And it's going to be quite unique, I think, in terms of some of the measures like air quality and recreational space and some of the other things that are being planned. It's a really exciting story.
This is the Endeavour or the Doivkin or the Sirius of 300 years ago, isn't it? It's of our generation, this type of flying, this real pioneering flying. Can we promise that we don't run a competition and call it Planey McPlaneface or something in these airplanes? Can we get an undertaking that we're going to come up with some appropriate names for the airplanes?
I would hope so. I think our naming has been pretty good so far. So,
but if it goes to public opinion, it'll be Planey McPlaneface, won't it?
Yes, I think we can resist that with a bit of luck.
I'm incredibly excited. As I said, Airbus is not my thing, but the whole concept of it's incredible. There's a little bit here. I'm just reading Sir Hudson Fysh's autobiography called Qantas Rising, which I picked up in Longreach. And this is Sir Hudson talking about McGuinness, his great mate Paul McGuinness. And he said, McGuinness, I think, had even less academic education than I had, because Sir Hudson wasn't a particularly good student either, was he? He didn't find his passion at school, so he was saying that McGuinness wasn't academic either, but he had something else, something great, something born of the young, immature, but intensely venturesome Australian returned from the war, groping with gusto for something ahead, something undreamt, but of which he must do. It was men like McGuinness, Ross Smith, Kingsford Smith, Ulm, Hinkler, and other Australians who infused that great spark of adventure, Columbus-like, into what air transport is today.
Fabulous.
He got it 40 years ago, didn't he? Sort of, it's incredible how these men could possibly imagine what we're about to launch on next year, isn't it?
Absolutely. And the other thing about it is I think it's going to be pretty unique for quite a long period of time. Obviously, any big airline could physically afford to buy the aircraft, but it is so perfectly fit and suited to our needs of these long, major trunk routes, but long haul, these sort of Londons and New Yorks. It makes sense for us to have that as a subset of our fleet, because it's servicing our most important routes. For any other airline, a big European airline or a big American airline, of course they could buy them, but why would you have one aircraft type just to go to Australia on the fringes of your network when most of your flying is shorter haul than that? So, I think it's highly likely we'll be the only ones to operate them, which will be a really unique thing for the airline and for the country.
They've sort of taken my next part of that question. What's coming in the next 10, 20, 30 years for the airline industry? What's your view of Qantas in 2050 or beyond? 20 years is a long time in aviation, so let's settle at that, 2045.
Yeah, that's obviously a critically important question that we debate a lot. I think consensus would be that we're moving away from the sort of A380, very large-scale hub type aircraft, and you'll go to more and more, maybe not these, but the XLR, 320 XLR, that sort of thing. I was just reading today about some budget airlines in Europe and the US starting to do some really long flights for them, like 6, 7, 8 hours of real budget airline type stuff, which be a test of people's patience, but that's changing. Charles, I think you'll see more and more thinner route point to point. Then the big question, of course, is propulsion and electric, hydrogen, all of that. And you would probably know better than me, but I can't see in my lifetime anyway major trunk route aircraft operating on either hydrogen or electric. I think to my understanding, neither of the major aircraft manufacturers have anything material on the drawing board in that respect. I think you'll definitely see it for sort of small commuter, air taxi, all that sort of thing. But to fly from here to Singapore or to London with an electric or hydrogen aircraft, I don't think that's going to happen. So the big push is probably going to be in the SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuel area. That's a challenge too. The airline industry as a whole has made all sorts of promises at the IATA level, etc., and it's pretty hard to see how that's realistically achievable unless there's a really concerted, coordinated attempt by governments, industry, agriculture to produce sufficient stock feed to generate that amount of SAF at an affordable price. And that's the conundrum today is, there isn't a lot available. Why isn't there a lot available? Because it costs a lot to make, and airlines can't afford to pay 2 or 3 times the cost they do for fuel, and they don't want to pass it on to passengers. And governments don't really want to see airfares double or something because of sustainable outcomes. It's sort of got this vicious circle going around. It's going to need governments, I think, to grasp the nettle and say, if we want this to happen, then we're going to have to subsidize the production of the fuel for as long as it takes to get scale around the world. I think that will probably come, but it's going to be a slow process.
Is there any parallel between the wine industry and aviation? Are they both nimble and able to adopt to global pressures and things like that, or are we just too big a behemoth where we just have to set course like the Titanic and hope that there's no 9/11s or GFCs iceberg sitting in our way? Have we lost the nimbility, if that's even a word, being nimble?
Well, one synergy is that the airlines fly it and I drink it, which seems to be perfectly in harmony.
It works pretty well, yeah.
It's a difficult one because there's no lack of will or willingness to embrace new ideas. But again, it's just far beyond my technical pay grade. But I read about the development of jet engines and things are starting to reach a level of efficiency that it's hard to see how it's going to become.
That critical.
Absolutely. You think the enormous gains in efficiency over the last 20, 30, 50 years, those gains are getting smaller now. And so the model of aviation, it's here for a while in its current form. And cars and trucks and all these other things I think can all adapt. It's going to be hard for the aviation industry.
Mm. Your phone sitting there behind the Sunrise airplane, John, is that full of famous people and important people in your contacts? I won't ask for any, but do a lot of people want the Qantas chairman's telephone number?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's surprising how many people have an opinion, certainly.
And are they happy to express it as well?
They're very happy to express it.
Pretty frankly as well, I guess.
Yeah. And look, I think part of my job is to, anybody who has a complaint, they should have my phone number. And I try to respond to everything myself. People take the trouble to write to me or call or text, I do respond. I obviously have to go to management for answers as to why this happened or that happened, but I think it's important that you do that. So otherwise you start to suffer a bit of hubris and up yourself that you're not going to respond to those day-to-day issues. But look, it's a privilege to have the role. It really is. I'm doing my very best to make sure that I add value and everybody in the team and the board never forgets, what they're there for.
Well, I think you're the 14th chairman of Qantas in 106 years.
Wow.
I thank you very much for taking the time to come and speak to me. It's been a real honour and a great pleasure. I could sit here for hours, but I realise you certainly have better things to do. I don't. So again, thank you so much for your time, John, and I certainly hope you enjoyed it.
No, thank you. The feeling's mutual. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Could also talk for another hour, but it was a real privilege to be here. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Thanks, everybody. That's been Stick With It.